Well, John was a very generous man, and he was very helpful to me. I met him by chance. Even though I had known him when I was in Philadelphia, he was a legend before I left Philly. But I never got to meet him in Philly. I met him in New York after he had finished a performance with Thelonious Monk. He was working with Monk then at the old Five spot downtown on 5 Cooper Square. And after the gig, it was about 4 in the morning, I asked John if I could stop by his house and he would give me some help on the horn. And he gave me his number, and I was there at 10 o'clock the next morning, not thinking that he probably didn't get home till 6, and he had a reputation for practicing himself to sleep. I mean, when he left the gig, he would go home and practice until he just fell asleep with the saxophone. So probably he had gone to bed about 7 in the morning, 6. And I was there at 10 the next morning for my lesson, convocation with John. So, but he was asleep, of course, and his wife at the time, Naima, Alice Coltrane, not Alice, Anita, that was his first wife, told me he was asleep. And he got up about 1 o'clock that afternoon, and I stayed there in his living room, just sitting with my horn, waiting patiently. And he came out, and his horn was already out. The saxophone was sitting on this sofa. He went right to his horn. I was really impressed to see him without his shirt, because he was wearing a T-shirt, and he had such big arms, and he looked rather small in his suit, but he was a much bigger guy than I had imagined he was. He was really quite costaud, as the French say. And so he went to his horn, and he started to play uninterruptedly for about 15 minutes. And it was something like giant steps, you might say. I mean, there were chords going in minor thirds, minor fourths, so on. And then he asked me to play some for him. And he told me, he said, well, your fingers are coming too high up off the keys. You've got to keep them closer to the keys if you want to move fast. So that was my sort of initial meeting with John. And unlike some of the other guys who really spent a lot of time with him, like Farrell and Wayne Shorter, and some of these guys were at his house basically every other day. Getting information. John was the Charlie Parker of his day. But I was married, I had children, and frequently I had to be home with my family or looking for a job, which we were on welfare for quite a while. But John was a very generous man, and from time to time he would call me, like for the Ascension Day, when he got ready to do that date. I had no idea. I was totally, I was very pleasantly surprised when he called me and said, Shepp, I'm doing a recording. Do you want to be part of it? And of course, with great enthusiasm, I accepted. And then I said, you know, John, Marion Brown is here with me. Would you think he would be a good idea to add to the session? And he said, yeah, bring him along. And that's how Marion was on the date, because we were both in my house together, and I recommended him to Train, and Train was very open to the idea.
Now you also had opportunities to play with Train in concert, in performance. What were those situations like?
Well, you know, I had sat in with Train. He used to play frequently at the Half Note on Spring Street in New York, And he was very liberal about letting people sit in. And sometimes there were really great sessions down there. John Gilmore, Lee Morgan sat in with him. And when I would come down, I would always feel that I was learning something. I mean, and he was always very open. He let me sit in, sometimes just by myself with the rhythm section and so on. But I never had the feeling up until that time that I was actually playing or part of the group. It wasn't until he invited me out to the Armory. Here again, it was by totally unexpected. He was doing a gig at the Armory in Chicago, and he invited me to be a part of that of his group, to come out and play with him. By the time we did Ascension, that's why I was telling the story about Eiler, because he had a big influence on he changed my entire perspective of what the saxophone was capable of, what it could do. So when Train called me for the date, I was a different saxophone player in a way, but I mentioned that in context of the Armory as well. But Train had, and I've always wondered why I didn't ask him exactly what you just asked me. What was he playing? Because he had written out a little sketch, chords, whatever, which he gave to McCoy to play. And after each solo, Dewey Johnson, John Chikai, Freddie, he would play an interlude based on the chords that he gave to McCoy to play. So he was the only one who was actually playing chords. I think he wanted the combination of free improvisation and something that was more controlled. But I've often asked myself, why didn't I ask him what chords he gave McCoy to play? Because it must have been quite interesting. When I hear him play, I know that he's not only playing free, but he's playing also in accordance with the music he had designed for McCoy to play.